Breaking Bad, Hank Schrader. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We continue our examination of various individuals from the Breaking Bad universe. I know that many of you are enjoying this series. I'm pleased to read that's the case. Do ensure that you share the videos to places where other fans of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul might be tempted to immerse themselves in these excellent psychological breakdowns, and give the videos a few watches to drive up the numbers so that the YouTube algorithm catches hold of it and propels it to greater prominence. My thanks in advance. As always, it's worth remembering that because we're dealing with fictional characters, there are certain aspects of their behaviours which are driven by the necessity of plot points, story development and character arcs which might not fully fit with the profiles that one would ordinarily expect, and that therefore sometimes there are behaviours and actions which would ordinarily be outliers. We're going to look at Henry R. Hank Schrader. He's a pivotal character in the Breaking Bad universe, appearing prominently in Breaking Bad and making cameo appearances in Better Call Saul. Portrayed by Dean Norris, Hank is a Drug Enforcement Administration agent, the brother-in-law to Walter White, and husband to Marie Schrader. His arc spans from a boisterous, confident law enforcement officer to a man grappling with trauma, obsession, and ultimately tragedy. In Breaking Bad, Hank starts as a secondary character providing comic relief through his brash humour and machismo, but evolves into a moral anchor, pursuing justice against the methamphetamine empire built by his own family member. In Better Call Saul, his role is more limited, showcasing his investigative prowess in earlier timelines, such as interrogating Domingo Crazy 8 Molina and staking out Gustavo Fring's operations. Psychologically, Hank embodies a complex mix of resilience, vulnerability, and determination. His behaviour often reflects the high-stakes world of drug enforcement, where bravado might mask deeper insecurities. It is the case that Hank can sometimes exhibit confidence bordering on arrogance and a competitive drive, although these are often contextualised by his profession. He appears to show empathy, remorse, and ethical grounding. However, there's also the possibility that he engages in grandiose traits. We're going to look at Hank's psychological makeup with a particular consideration with regard to narcissism and psychopathy. Hank's background sets the stage for this analysis. Born in 1966, he joined the DEA in the late 1980s, forming a close partnership with Steve "Gomi" Gomez. His marriage to Marie in 1998 highlights his persistence and loyalty as he repeatedly pursued her despite initial rejections. Family ties are central. His supportive uncle to Walter Jr., offering guidance on topics like drinking responsibly, and a protective figure to Skylar White. Yet his job exposes him to violence. In Breaking Bad Season 2, after killing Tuco Salamanca in self-defense, in Grilled, Hank suffers panic attacks, hyperventilating in elevators, and withdrawing from social actions. This vulnerability humanizes him and certainly contrasts with the unemotional attachment of a psychopath. Professionally, Hank is competent and ambitious. Rising to Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, by Season 5, he brews his own beer, Schrader, symbolizing his need for personal achievement, and later collects minerals during recovery, correcting others who call them rocks to assert expertise. These hobbies reflect a desire for control and validation, potentially aligning with narcissistic traits, but they might also be seen as separate coping mechanisms. In The Guy for This, Hank's interrogation of Crazy 8 demonstrates his shrewdness, negotiating informant status with a mix of intimidation and pragmatism, without unnecessary cruelty. Overall, Hank's arc is one of heroism, tainted by hubris and trauma. He dies in Ozymandias during a desert shootout, defiantly telling his killers, "My name is Asak Schrader, and you can go fuck yourself." This moment underscores his pride and his integrity. Hank frequently exaggerates his achievements. This is a core narcissistic trait where individuals expect recognition without commensurate accomplishments. In Pilot, Hank boasts about a DEA bust at a family barbecue, dominating the conversation, sense of entitlement, grandiosity, and showing off seized cash to Walter Jr., saying, "That's right, buddy, make him nice and crisp." This bravado inflates his role, positioning him as the family's alpha male, especially contrasting with Walter's initial meekness. Similarly, in Over, after his promotion to El Paso, Hank brags about the opportunity, viewing it as validation of his superiority. However, this grandiosity is not unfounded. Hank is genuinely skilled. In Bagman, he and Gomez recover $700,000 from Fring's dead drops, showcasing real competence. Unlike the empty boasts that are seen with a pure narcissist, Hank stem from earned pride, and he does show humility in defeat, such as after the El Paso bombing, where he returns home defeated, not enraged at perceived slights. The narcissist fantasizes about power and brilliance. Hank's obsession with catching Heisenberg borders on this, as seen in Gliding Over All, where he pores over evidence in his garage, imagining himself as the hero dismantling an empire. This fixation escalates after discovering Walter's identity in blood money, leading to a single-minded pursuit that strains his health and relationships. Yet Hank's fantasies are actually professional duties. They are not delusional. He tells Marie in 1 minute, "I'm unravelling here," admitting his limits, which is unusual for a narcissist, unless, of course, it is doled out as a pity play. His drive is justice-oriented, not self-aggrandizing. He risks his career to build a case against Walter, prioritizing ethics over personal glory. Hank's DEA role fosters associating with high-status people, as he looks down on civilians like Walt initially, calling teaching not real work. In Cancer Man, he states that as such. He also uses racial humour, like calling Mexican beaners, implying superiority, which could reflect haughty attitudes. But Hank's relationships do tend to contradict this. He bonds with Gomez, a Latino colleague, and supports Walt during cancer treatment, driving him to chemo in Grey Matter. His uniqueness is actually more about cultural machismo rather than narcissism. He corrects others in relation to minerals in Cornered, not to alienate them, but to educate them, showing inclusivity. Narcissists invariably crave attention, particularly praise. Hank does seek validation through storytelling, like recounting the Tuco shootout in Breakage, where he downplays his fear to appear heroic at a party. In Buried, after promotion, he enjoys the ASAC title, using it assertively. His need for recognition and attention is moderate. It's not excessive. Hank accepts criticism, such as from Mercad in Problem Dog, and he shows vulnerability to his wife Marie, confessing panic attacks without demanding sympathy. Unlike the attention-seeking of narcissism, Hank's is situational, tied to coping with trauma. What about entitlement? Hank occasionally demands compliance, like in Sunset, pressuring Walt for help bugging Cus's car, exploiting family ties. In The Guy for This, he bullies Crazy 8 into cooperation. However, this is linked to investigative strategy, not personal entitlement. Hank respects boundaries, apologising to Jesse after assaulting him in 1 minute, and refuses Marie's stolen tiara in 38 Snub, showing moral integrity over self-interest. With regard to interpersonally exploitative behaviour, Hank manipulates Jesse in Rabid Dog to trap Walt, wiring him for a confession, but this is a law enforcement tactic and not personal exploitation. He forms an uneasy alliance with Jesse, showing reluctant empathy by protecting him from Walt's threats. By contrast, Hank's family interactions are supportive. He funds Walt's treatment anonymously in Phoenix without expecting reciprocation, defying exploitative patterns. With regard to emotional empathy, Hank can be insensitive, dismissing Marie's concerns during recovery in crawl space, snapping at her for nagging. In IFT, he beats Jesse severely, driven by rage over a prank call implying Marie's death. Yet Hank does display emotional empathy repeatedly, comforting Walt after his diagnosis and the bag's in the river, empathising with Gomez's family post-death, and regretting the Jesse assault, saying to Gomez, "I lost control." This appears to my mind that many of his behaviours are driven by post-traumatic stress disorder after the incident with Tuco Salamander. He empathises with victims and doesn't show callous behaviour. It's certainly the case that he exhibits some degree of envy. He envies Walt's intelligence subtly, mocking chemistry in Season 1, but later seeking his advice on Gale's lab notes in bullet points. He believes others envy his success, boasting post-promotion. But it's mild. Hank admires Walt initially, toasting his remission in Over. His envy stems from insecurity rather than a pathological envy. Hank's rudeness, like racial jokes in Cats in the Bag, fits haughtiness. He does belittle suspects, calling Jesse dipshit in Season 5. But there is arrogance that's softened by vulnerability. In 1 minute, he cries to Marie about fears, showing the humility that is absent in a narcissist. Hank does show 2 or 3 criteria in relation to grandiosity, arrogance, and a mild degree of entitlement, but he lacks the pervasive emotional empathy deficit and exploitativeness. He, if anything, would show shades of a mid-range narcissist, seeking admiration through altruism, for instance, protecting family. But in actual fact, those behaviours are better described as a consequence of the effects of trauma and machismo. What about the possibility of psychopathy? Hank's law enforcement role could mimic some traits. Boldness. He is a boisterous individual, which could resemble glibness, as in Crazy Handful of Nothing, joking during a raid. He deceives suspects, like bluffing Crazy 8 in The Guy for This. But his charm is genuine. He builds real bonds with Gomez and family. He rarely lies personally, confessing vulnerabilities to Walt in Negro y Azul about panic attacks. Unlike a psychopath's manipulation for gain, Hank's deceptions serve justice. Hank demonstrates remorse after assaulting Jesse, facing suspension without deflection, and expresses guilt to Marie. In Confessions, he empathises with Jesse's trauma, saying the kid's been through the ringer. Callousness is absent with Hank. Post-shooting the cousins in 1 minute, Hank is traumatised, not indifferent. His shallow affect claim fails. He weeps over Gomez's death in Ozymandias, displaying deep emotion. Psychopaths often act impulsively, without long-term goals. Hank's assault on Jesse is impulsive, fueled by anger, leading to consequences he accepts. In Half Measures, he pursues the cousins against orders, risking his life. Yet overall, Hank plans meticulously, like staking out dead drops in Better Call Saul. His career shows responsibility. He's promoted for competence. He supports family financially during recovery. Impulsivity is stress-induced rather than chronic. What about boldness and fearlessness? Hank's bravery in shootouts, like versus Tuco in Grilled, fits, but he then develops post-traumatic stress disorder, panicking in elevators in the episode Breakage, and admitting fear to Walt. This anxiety flies in the face of psychopathic resilience. As a cop, Hank bends rules, assaulting Jesse, bugging without warrants, but these aren't self-serving crimes. He upholds the law, arresting Walt despite family ties. He doesn't show repeated antisocial behaviours. There isn't a parasitic lifestyle. Hank works diligently, brewing beer as a hobby. He doesn't exploit others financially. What about sensation-seeking and manipulation? Well, Hank certainly seeks thrills in raids, but channels it professionally. Manipulation, like wiring Jesse, is tactical, not egocentric. In contrast to Walter White, Hank shows moral growth, allying with Jesse out of shared purpose. Hank's trauma response, PTSD from the El Paso bombing and the cousins' attack, highlights emotional depth. He reviews his therapy initially owing to stigma and breakage, but improves through hobbies, unlike a psychopath's unremorseful persistence. Hank's behaviours aren't norm-violating beyond job demands. He's socially integrated. Hank scores lowly in relation to psychopathic behaviours. He has some boldness but no effective deficits. He shows heroic bravado rather than pathology. Hank shows some grandiosity. He shows some risk-taking in boldness, but this contrasts sharply with the presence of emotional empathy, remorse, and ethics. For instance, his obsession with Heisenberg would mirror the narcissist's preoccupation, but it serves justice rather than self. His impulsivity shows some psychopathy, but actually stems from trauma, not irresponsibility. Ultimately, Hank is neither narcissist or psychopath. He's a flawed hero with post-traumatic stress disorder and machismo. Hank represents resilience. His death affirms integrity, facing killers. He prioritizes dignity over survival, a far cry from the disorder's sense of self-preservation. His disorder-like traits are adaptive responses to chaos rather than innate pathology, and overall, Hank Schrader would be seen as a normal, exhibiting both empathic and narcissistic traits, but clearly an individual that has emotional empathy for those within that circle of empathy around him. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.